If you're building a no-code app on Bubble, should you use a template? Now, when you're using bubble.io, it essentially gives you a blank canvas upon which you can build your app. You can design the front end, the back end, you can create all of the workflows, the logic, all the functionality. But you can also choose to use a template to get started, which puts the base layer of that front end, that back end, those workflows, that functionality in place, and you can then tweak, modify, build on top of, or expand on that. But there are some pros and cons to using templates. And so if you're moving forward with building your no-code app on Bubble, I want you to be able to make the right decision for you and for your app on whether or not you should use a template. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because I also want to guide you into a free extended training. So if you are starting to build your app, you can move forward a lot more strategically and a lot more correctly. So stick around for that. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help non-technical entrepreneurs build custom apps so they can either launch their app-based businesses or grow their existing businesses all without coding. All right, so the first thing I want to do is take you over to the templates page on Bubble itself. Now, there are other companies that offer templates, but Bubble has its own marketplace where you can also find these templates. And if you come to the template page of Bubble's site, you'll see a very large collection of these templates. Now, some of them, as you can see, are free, and some of them are going to be paid. Some of them are going to be paid. You're going to have to pay for them on the lower end in terms of price point. Some of them are going to be a lot more expensive, and it really depends on what you're wanting. Obviously, with something that's free or that costs less, you're probably going to be getting less functionality. With something that costs more, you're probably going to be getting fuller functionality within that template. And so if you're just looking to get started and really just want to see what kinds of templates are out there, this is a really good place to start. That said, before we go any further, I want to talk through the pros and the cons of using templates, because while templates can be really helpful and really advantageous in some situations, in others, they could end up leading you and your app astray. And so I want to make sure you have all the information before digging in too far so that you can make really just the right decision for yourself as you move forward. So let's start with when you should use a template, because there are a handful of situations where templates can really benefit you in the process of building and launching your app, and even learning how to manage and maintain and grow your app moving forward. So the first situation in which you should consider using a template for your no-code app is if you are only building, at this stage at least, a really simple prototype with limited functionality. So we won't go too deeply into this because we have other videos that talk about it, but a prototype and an MVP, a minimum viable product, those are two different things, just the same as an MVP is different from a full scope app, for example. Now, a prototype is something you use to convey your idea. Maybe you are pitching your idea to investors, but you're not building it out yet. You want to get validation for that idea first. Well, then you could put together a prototype, which can be pulled up on a laptop, a tablet, a phone, but has very limited or maybe even no functionality, but you can still convey the idea of your app using it better than you could if you were just talking about it, for example. So templates can be really good for that, because some templates are going to, if you had a dashboard app that you wanted to build, you could pull up a template for dashboard apps. You could change some of the coloring, the branding to make it look like your own, and you could have some of that very core baseline functionality already in place, again, just to convey your idea. And you could do that without having to add on, adjust, or modify the template at all. And so if you're really just looking to put together a really quick prototype, templates can be great for that, and they can save you some time. On that same note, another reason why you might want to use a template is if you're just using the template for one specific feature within your overarching app. So let's say you are building your own app and you've built out the core functionality, but there is a piece of functionality that you could employ a lot more quickly with a template, and it would not affect your overall app or your overall learning process, which we'll talk about in a minute, but that will help you move along a little bit more quickly in using the template. And an example of this is, if you look at these templates on the screen here, we have a landing page. So this is not a full-blown app with a full scope functionality. This is a landing page that you can just employ really quickly. This over here is a registration form. So again, obviously not a full-blown app, but if you don't want to create your own registration form and you like the way this one looks, then you could employ it in your app really quickly and have it up and running without having to do any of the heavy lifting on your end. And you can also see here that there's a template for a dashboard. So if there is a dashboard component within your overall app, and it doesn't need a lot of custom functionality, and you like what you see here, and you just want to really just plug it into your app, and you don't care to expand or build on top of it or really adjust it, then you could take this, put it into your overall app as just another component to add on to. On the flip side, though, aside from using a template to move a little bit faster in some situations, really the most effective way to use templates, and the way that I would really recommend you use them if you are, is just to learn. As someone who is coming into the no-code space, there's a good chance you're doing so because you want to have some level of control over your app. At least that's what our students and our clients want. They want to understand how their app is built so that they can grow and manage and really just keep scaling their app thereafter a lot more easily than if they were outsourcing and relying on developers for the lifetime of their app. And so with templates, you can, even if you're not using a template in your app, or even if you use it at first, but then build on your own so that you can build from the ground up, templates can serve as a really great learning resource to help you understand how things are built, to help you kind of really just take a peek behind the scenes and see how the functionality has been put together. Now, caveat here is that there's not one way to build every single feature or every specific functionality. There are many ways to do it, and there are ways that are going to be right for some people in some use cases and some apps, and those ways that are right for them might be completely wrong for someone else. And so I do want you to keep in mind that with app development, that's really just the nature of it. There's a lot of variation. There are lots of different ways you can do things, and there's lots of context that has to be taken into the picture to effectively build your app. And so you can learn a lot from templates, but I want you to keep in mind that a lot of templates are going to be crowdsourced in the sense that anybody can build a template and put it out there for someone else to use. And so you just want to make sure that if you're using a template for learning processes, that it's very contained and that you understand there could be other ways to do something. There could be other ways to do something that's right for you. So it's using templates as a positive in that way, but just keep that in mind so that you can have the bigger picture as you move forward. Now, there's one other situation in which you might find a template to be useful, and that is if you are not actually the one who's going to be building your app. So maybe you don't care about having that level of control over your app that we had talked about. Maybe you really just want to get it up and running as quickly as possible, and you want someone else to do it. And that's fine if that's the case. But in that situation, if you can find a template that can lay the groundwork for what you're building, and then have a developer, for example, come in and build on top of that template or expand it, then that could ultimately help you move just a little bit more quickly, because you're kind of jumping ahead from the starting line before bringing someone in to ultimately build the rest of the app. Now, all that being said, there is a caveat to this one as well that I want you to be aware of, and that's if you're outsourcing and you're starting with a template, sometimes developers are going to want to build the app from scratch regardless. They might not want to come in and use a template. And that really goes back to what I was saying about how there are always multiple ways to achieve the same thing. And so for one developer, they might do something one way. Another developer might do that same thing a completely different way. And so if you're bringing a developer in and they're going to be expanding on a template, you're going to want to make sure that they're happy to start with a template and that that is actually, at the end of the day, going to help you move forward more quickly. Or if ultimately they're going to have to start over anyway. So just keep that in mind. And the way to figure that out is really just to ask. If you find a developer who you're outsourcing with, ask them if that's something they're okay doing. Or you might find a developer who does development work and also creates templates. And if that's the case, then it's a pretty sure bet that they'd be happy to modify their own templates. So keep that in mind if that's the path you're going with your app. So looking at the different situations that we've talked about so far, it can seem like using a template is a really great place to start. And those are some good places to start with templates if they fit your situation. But I want to make sure you are thinking of the big picture. And I say that in having worked with a lot of entrepreneurs who have started with templates and tried to make them work and inevitably have ended up coming back and restarting. And so there are some other situations in which you might not want to use a template, and I want you to be aware of those so that you can avoid any potential backtracking and just move forward a lot more quickly and in a much more streamlined way with your app. So the first one on the list for reasons why you might not want to use a template is if you're not open to potentially rebuilding your app. And I say this, and I've already given a little bit of context to this, but I say this because if you're using a template, you are starting with someone else's work. And especially if you're new to app development and you've never built an app before, you've never used Bubble before, you're really going through the learning process from the very start. If you use a template to build the base layer of your app or to kind of cover the base layer of your app, and then you try to start a few steps ahead, in expanding and customizing that template and really just moving forward your app from there, you could have a really hard time. And I see this happening with a lot of people who get started with templates, because if you use someone else's work, an existing template to form the base of your app, well, those are the foundational pieces that you really have to understand if you want to be able to effectively build and grow on top of that. So it's kind of like if you're trying to learn a new language and you go right into the second level of the language where you're having conversations, but you haven't covered the first level, which is conjugating verbs, right? You're going to have a really hard time at that second level if you don't start at the first level before that. And it's the same with apps. And so, thinking about creating the correct database structure and how that ties into the front end of your app, and how all of the foundational pieces work with the navigation of your app, the overall architecture. If you don't understand those things, and those are all the things that should come first before you start putting on those more niche features and that more custom functionality. If you don't understand those, and you could have a really hard time in later stages as you try to build on top of that template. And that means that ultimately there's a good chance you'd have to start over. And that's the thing I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs do, is they get to that point, they go through all that work, and ultimately they end up just coming back at the end of the day, starting over, scrapping the template, building their app from scratch so they can have the understanding of how their app has been built. And more importantly, why it has been built in a certain way. Because until you understand that, again, you're going to really struggle to build on top of it and continue growing. Now, of course, this applies to a situation where you would be using a template to form the base of your app as a whole. So we talked about how templates can be more complex, more involved, and some templates can be really contained, like a registration functionality. So assuming you're looking at using a template to build the basis of your app, that's where this applies, because chances are you're going to want to build on top of that regardless. Even though it is forming the foundation, the template is kind of laying that foundation, you're going to need to tweak it. You're going to need to build on top. You're just not going to find a template that literally has every feature and piece of functionality that you need, because that's kind of the point of building an app, right? You're building something unique. And so you're going to have to plan on expanding and customizing templates. And if you don't understand the core before you go and try to do that, you could have a really hard time. Another situation where I would want to potentially steer you away from using a template is if your only goal is to just be able to launch faster. Now, I know we already talked about how some of the pros of using templates, the positives, involve being able to move more quickly. But again, taking a step up and kind of looking bigger picture here, if your only goal is speed, is to be able to move quickly, then it can be tough to move forward with a template and actually achieve that at least how you've envisioned it. And this goes back to what I was just saying about not really understanding how the base of your app is being built, and therefore really struggling and adding on a lot of extra time in those later stages, trying to just figure it out. When a lot of the times, if you had just started from scratch in the first place, you'd ultimately be able to move forward probably more quickly. Now, if you are only looking for speed, then using some templates that have just the really contained functionality could help. But if you're using a bigger, more full scope template, I just want you to be aware that there's a good chance you're not going to be able to move as quickly as you think you are. And again, I say that after having had lots of conversations with entrepreneurs who understandably want to launch their apps quickly and want to use no-code tools to do that. And some people want to launch an app using a template in maybe a couple of weeks, maybe even a month. And I rarely see that being realistic for people, again, just because of the lack of understanding of how it has been built. And so usually what ends up happening, if your only focus is on speed and you're using a template because you want to move fast, usually what ends up happening is you have to bring on a developer to either take over that template or just start the app from scratch anyways. Again, if your only priority is speed. And so just keep those things in mind as you move forward. To add to all of those and to kind of sum everything up, if you are the type of person who wants to build a no-code app because you want to be able to control and manage it and maintain it and grow it on your own without having to rely on developers or agencies, if that's why you're coming into this space and you're building an app, then I would encourage you to think really think about using a template. And I know I've mentioned this already, but I have to emphasize it again so that you're aware. If you use a template to form the base of your app, and then you try to build on top of that, you could have a really hard time understanding the necessary fundamentals that will allow you to continue growing and scaling on your own later. The way I like to look at this is, if you're outsourcing your app, you're going to be relying on developers really for the lifetime of your app. Even after you launch, and maybe most of that is focused on the day-to-day maintenance, you're still going to have to be reliant on someone else to take care of that. I usually call that being handcuffed to a developer. And that's not to say that using a developer is wrong. If it's right for you, then that's great, obviously. It's just something to keep in mind. But if that's not what you want, and I know a lot of people don't want that, then you can end up feeling the same way if you start with a template and then you try to have that control as you grow and as you scale. You can end up kind of feeling like you're a little bit handcuffed, because if you don't truly understand how the template was created and why things were done in a certain way, then you're just going to have a hard time expanding on top of it. And so you can feel like you're handcuffed to the functionality of the template. And again, the whole reason why you're building an app is because you want to create something that's unique. And so you don't want to be handcuffed to that functionality. So if you really don't want to be reliant, if you want to be more self-sufficient, if that's one of your priorities, then using templates to learn can be helpful. Using templates just for really contained features that can be helpful. It's not necessary, but it can be helpful if you want to. But using it to form the foundation of your app and growing and expanding on top of that isn't always as easy or straightforward, as simple as it sounds. So I hope that gives you a clear view of the positives to using templates, some of the negatives potentially, and whether it's right for you, really just based on your priorities, because that's what's important here. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this video that if you're moving into these next steps with your app, you're just starting out, or maybe you have started and you're still in those early stages, and you want to make sure you are moving forward in the most strategic ways possible, in the most correct ways possible, ideally, then we have a free training over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop that will take you through a process of making sure you're building the right features with your app at the right time in the right order so you can launch the right things at the right time. It'll take you through some specifics on Bubble and using the no-code tool and leveraging it for your own needs, and really just what's possible with no-code tools so that you can move forward having that bigger picture view and really just with more confidence and more strategy. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop for that. We'll hope to see you there. And I hope you found this helpful. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.